Theo Bannister was 44 years old when he signed his divorce papers without saying a single word in protest. For 2 years, Priscilla had called him dead weight to her friends, mocked his quiet job fixing municipal water systems, and laughed at his one small ritual, buying a single lottery ticket every Friday, just for fun. She never once thought to ask what he was building in silence. That night, alone in his empty apartment, Theo unpacked a box and found last Friday's ticket still in his coat pocket. He almost didn't check it. When he did, his hands went cold. The numbers matched. $1 billion. 24 hours after the ink dried on his divorce, Priscilla was standing at his door with her lawyer, demanding half of a fortune she never believed he was capable of winning. And in that frozen moment, staring at her through the doorway, Theo understood something she didn't yet know. She had already lost everything. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The pen felt heavier than it should have. Theo Bannister sat at a long conference table on the 14th floor of a downtown office building, the kind of place with stiff chairs and carpet that was probably expensive 20 years ago. The room smelled like old coffee and printer ink. Outside the tall windows, the city moved on like nothing was happening. Traffic crawled. A pigeon landed on the ledge and disappeared. Theo looked down at the papers in front of him. 31 pages, every line neat, every box checked. The top sheet said, "Final decree of dissolution of marriage" in clean black letters. Below his name, below Priscilla's name, below the case number, there was a blank line waiting for his signature. He read the last page one more time. Not because he expected to find anything new, because that was how he did things. You checked, you verified, you made sure before you committed. That was the engineer in him. He had spent 18 years as a municipal water systems engineer for the city. He managed pipe networks and pump stations and pressure zones. He solved problems that most people never saw coming, in places they never thought about. A water main buried 40 feet underground didn't care how you felt. It only cared whether you got the math right. Theo got the math right. Every time. He uncapped the pen. You know what your problem is, Theo? You think everything is a pipe. Priscilla's voice came to him as clearly as if she were standing in the room. He hadn't gone looking for the memory. It just arrived. They had been at a dinner party. 2 years ago, maybe a little more. Her colleagues, her wine, her conversation. He had said something about a project at work, something about rerouting a section of aging infrastructure before it failed, and she had laughed. Not with him. At him. In front of 6 people she cared about impressing. Nobody at this table wants to talk about pipes, sweetheart. He remembered the silence after that. The way one of her colleagues had looked down at his plate. The way Theo had simply nodded and reached for his water glass and said nothing. He had said nothing a lot toward the end. Theo touched the pen to the signature line. The Friday tickets had been another source of ammunition. Every week on his way home from work, he stopped at the same gas station on Calloway Street and bought 1 lottery ticket. Same routine for 11 years. He never picked the numbers himself. Always the quick pick, whatever the machine gave him. It cost $2. He kept the ticket in his coat pocket until Saturday morning, checked the numbers over coffee, and threw it away. It was a small thing, a private thing. Priscilla had found out about it somewhere around year 3 of the marriage and never let it go. 1 ticket. Not even a real play. You know the odds of winning anything on 1 ticket, right? It's embarrassing. Grown man wishing on a scratch-off like a kid at a gas station. It's not a scratch-off, he had told her. Does it matter? He had stopped explaining it after a while. He wasn't sure he could explain it exactly. It wasn't really about winning. It was just a habit, Something that was his. Something small and consistent in a life where small and consistent things kept everything running, like water through a pipe. He almost smiled at that. Then he thought about the divorce filing, how fast she had moved once she decided, how she had sat across from him at their kitchen table 8 weeks ago, their old kitchen table in the house he had helped pick and helped pay for, and told him she wanted it clean and simple. No formal review of assets, no extended discovery. Just sign the papers and be done. "There's no point dragging this out," she had said. "We both know there's nothing complicated to divide." She had meant it as an insult. He had recognized it as one. But he had also run the numbers in his head the way he always did, and she wasn't wrong about the assets. The house was in both names, but she had the equity argument. The savings were modest. His pension had been the subject of city budget rumors she seemed to believe more than he did. She had her brokerage income, her car, her contacts. She had calculated that there was nothing in Theo Bannister worth the trouble of a fight. So she hadn't fought. She had simply walked away, like leaving a job she was bored with. Theo pressed down and signed his name in one clean motion. Theodoric James Bannister. The same signature he used on engineering reports and purchase orders and city infrastructure assessments. Calm, clear, no hesitation. He set down the pen. His attorney, a quiet man named Fletcher who wore reading glasses on a chain, gathered the pages and slid them into a manila folder. He pressed a stamp onto the top sheet and wrote the time in ballpoint, 2:47 p.m. "That's it," Fletcher said. "Filed and finalized as of today." Theo nodded once. "Thank you." He picked up his copy, folded it into thirds, and placed it inside his coat pocket. He shook Fletcher's hand. He took the elevator down alone. Outside, the afternoon air was cool and smelled faintly of rain that hadn't arrived yet. He found his car in the parking structure across the street, a 10-year-old gray sedan he kept clean and well-maintained, and drove home to the apartment he had rented 6 weeks ago. It was small. It was quiet. It was his. He set the decree on the kitchen counter. He made coffee. He sat down at the table by the window, and he watched the city outside, and the marriage was over. The box had been sitting in the corner of the bedroom for 3 weeks. It was one of those moving boxes that never quite gets opened because it doesn't contain anything urgent. No plates, no work clothes, no phone charger, just the leftover layer of a life, the things you grab at the end, when the rooms are already bare, when you're just sweeping what remains into whatever space is left. Theo pulled it open after dinner. Inside, a spare umbrella, a phone cord he didn't recognize, a coffee mug from a city infrastructure conference 4 years ago, a folded rain jacket, and beneath all of it, his dark wool coat. The one he wore on Fridays, usually, on his walk from the parking lot to the office and back. He pulled the coat out and shook it lightly. It was habit. He always checked pockets before putting anything in the wash. His hand went into the left pocket first, nothing, then the right. His fingers touched paper, a lottery ticket. He knew without looking what it was. The small rectangular slip, slightly waxy at the edges, printed in that particular faded font. He pulled it out and held it under the bedroom lamp. Last Friday's ticket. Quick pick. $2. He had bought it on the way home from work. His last Friday as a married man, though he hadn't known it then. He had tucked it away and forgotten about it entirely in the noise of everything that had followed. The final review of the paperwork, the sleepless Thursday night, the drive downtown, the conference room, the pen. He had never checked the numbers. Theo carried the ticket to the kitchen table and sat down. He set it face up next to his coffee mug. He pulled out his phone without any urgency, the way a man reaches for a fork. It was routine. a thing he had done hundreds of times before. He opened the lottery site and tapped to the latest results. He looked at the numbers on the screen. Then he looked at the ticket. He looked at the screen again. He didn't move. 6 numbers. All 6. Matching in the same sequence, clean and exact, like pressure readings that should not have been possible. Theo put the phone down on the table. He picked it back up. He opened the results page again, the same one, and read every number out loud in a low voice, barely above a whisper. Then he read them off the ticket. Then he did it a third time. His hands had started shaking somewhere between the second and third check. Not badly, not the shaking of a man who was losing his grip. More like the small vibration of something under load, a pipe wall with pressure building behind it. $1 billion. The jackpot had been climbing for 11 weeks. He had heard it mentioned on the radio. He had seen the number on the gas station sign, the one on Calloway Street where he always bought his ticket. He had not thought much about it, because he never thought much about it. That wasn't the point of the ticket. He set it flat on the table. The purchase date was printed on the back, last Friday, 4 days ago. He had bought it after work, well before the 2:47 p.m. stamp Fletcher had pressed onto his divorce decree today. But the drawing, the actual drawing, had happened at 9:00 p.m., that same night, tonight, hours after the divorce was already filed and finalized. Theo sat with that fact for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone and called Ruth. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, how are you holding up?" "I need you to listen to me carefully," he said. A short pause. Ruth had been a paralegal for 19 years. She could hear a change in tone the way Theo could hear a change in pipe pressure. "I'm listening," he told her. The ticket, the numbers, the date. He read everything off slowly, the way he would walk a new technician through a systems diagram. Ruth was quiet the entire time. When he finished, she said nothing for 3 full seconds. Then, "Do not tell anyone. Not a single person, Theo. Not a neighbor, not a co-worker, nobody. Does Priscilla know?" "No." "Good. Keep it that way." He could hear her moving, footsteps on hardwood, a door closing. "The timing is the whole thing here. We need to know exactly where the law puts you before one word of this gets out. You need to call Gabriel Voss. Tonight, right now. He does estate and trust work. He'll know exactly what needs to happen and how fast it needs to happen." Her voice was steady but tight, like a wire under tension. "This is not a conversation to have tomorrow, Theo. You call him tonight." "Okay. And Theo," she paused, "don't lose that ticket." He hung up and dialed Gabriel Voss. Gabriel picked up on the 4th ring, voice relaxed, evening sounds in the background. Within 2 minutes of Theo explaining, the relaxed tone was completely gone. He asked 4 precise questions, verified the dates, and said he would pull the state statutes that night. "I'll call you in the morning," Gabriel said. "Don't do anything. Don't say anything." "Understood." The call ended. Theo set the phone down on the table beside the ticket. The apartment was quiet. The city hummed faintly outside the window. He looked at the small slip of paper under the kitchen light. $2, a quick pick, an 11-year habit. And he sat with the stillness of a man who didn't yet know whether the thing in front of him was a gift or a grenade. Gabriel called at 7:14 in the morning. Theo was already up. He hadn't slept much. He'd sat at the kitchen table until past midnight, then moved to the couch, then given up entirely, and made coffee at 5 a.m. The ticket was still on the table, exactly where he'd left it, under the lamp. He picked up on the first ring. "I've been through it twice," Gabriel said. He skipped any greeting. That was how Theo knew it was serious. The drawing occurred at 9:01 p.m. on Friday. Your divorce decree was signed, filed, and officially timestamped at 2:47 p.m. that same day. Under state law, that makes the winnings acquired after the marital estate was dissolved. A brief pause. Theo, she has no claim. 0. The ticket is yours, clean and entirely separate. There's nothing for her to touch. Theo exhaled slowly through his nose. Now, Gabriel continued, legally sound and legally protected are two different things. I want to move fast. I'm drawing up an irrevocable trust today. Your name, sole beneficiary, locked before this news gets anywhere near a courtroom. Once the structure is in place, it becomes significantly harder for anyone to challenge, even frivolously. How fast is fast? I need your signature on the initial framework by this afternoon. I'll messenger the documents to your address. Don't go to the lottery office yet. Don't call anyone. Just sign and return them, and I'll do the rest tonight. Okay, Theo said. Are you all right? Theo looked at the ticket on the table. Yeah, he said. I'm good. He meant it. The documents arrived just before noon. Theo read every page twice, not out of distrust, but because that was how he did things. He checked each clause the way he checked a pressure diagram, looking for anything that didn't sit right. It all sat right. He signed where indicated, sealed the envelope, and handed it to the waiting courier at 12:40 p.m. He made a second cup of coffee and sat back down. At 2:11 p.m. his phone rang. Unknown number. He didn't answer. 3 minutes later, it rang again. Then again. He turned it face down. Then his phone buzzed with a text from Ruth. Turn on your TV. Channel 8. Right now. He grabbed the remote. On the screen, a regional news anchor was talking over a graphic that showed the lottery jackpot total, $1,000, and beside it, blurred slightly but unmistakably him, a photo pulled from the city's public infrastructure directory. His name was printed beneath it. The chyron at the bottom read, Local engineer wins billion-dollar jackpot. His phone started ringing again. He understood immediately. Marcus Webb, his former co-worker, the one who'd bought the Calloway Street gas station 2 years ago. Marcus would have recognized his name on the regional winners list and talked before Theo had even thought to ask him not to. He turned off the TV. His phone kept buzzing. Texts now, some from numbers he recognized, most from numbers he didn't. He set it back down, face down again, and stood at the kitchen window looking out at the parking lot. He had 3 hours of quiet. Maybe less. It turned out to be 2. The knock came at 4:38 p.m. Theo heard it from the kitchen and knew, before he even moved toward the door, who it would be. The knock had a particular rhythm to it, sharp and certain, the kind that expects to be answered immediately. He walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Priscilla stood in the hallway in her long camel coat, the one she wore when she wanted to look important. Her hair was done, her jaw was set. And standing just behind her, slightly to her left, was a tall man in a charcoal suit, dark-skinned, broad-shouldered, polished to the point of looking almost artificial. A leather portfolio was tucked under his arm. Theo recognized neither the man nor the suit, but he understood the portfolio immediately. He opened the door. Theo? Priscilla's voice was warm and firm at the same time, the way she talked to difficult clients. We need to talk. Priscilla? The man stepped slightly forward. Mr. Bannister, my name is Desmond Okafor. I'm representing your ex-wife regarding the lottery winnings reported this afternoon. He had the smooth, unhurried voice of someone accustomed to controlling a room. We believe there's a legitimate marital property claim here. The ticket in question was purchased during the marriage, and the ticket was purchased on Friday at approximately 5:15 p.m., Theo said. His voice was level. The divorce decree was filed and finalized at 2:47 p.m. the same day. The drawing occurred at 9 p.m. All three of those times are public record. He looked at Desmond without blinking. The purchase date is printed on the ticket. The filing timestamp is in the county clerk's database. Anyone can check. Desmond smiled. It was practiced and patient. These things aren't always as simple as, "She has no claim," Theo said. "Not to $1." Priscilla's warmth slipped, just slightly. "Theo, you don't have to make this difficult. We can—" "I'm not making anything." He looked at her directly. "The divorce is finalized. There's nothing to discuss." He closed the door. He stood in the entry hall for a moment, listening. He heard a muffled exchange in the hallway, Priscilla's voice, tight and clipped, and Desmond's, lower and measured. Then footsteps receding down the hall. Theo walked back to the kitchen table. He sat down. He looked at the ticket. She hadn't left because the marriage was broken. She had left because she'd decided he had nothing. She had been so sure of it that she hadn't even bothered to look. And now he needed to understand exactly how that decision had been made. And why. He reached for his phone and called Ruth. Gabriel's letter arrived on Wednesday morning, delivered by the same courier service as before. It was 4 pages long, formal and precise, printed on his firm's letterhead. Theo read it at the kitchen table with his coffee going cold beside him. The first paragraph said everything that mattered. The irrevocable trust has been executed and recorded. The lottery winnings, in the total pre-tax amount of $1 billion, are held solely in the name of Theodore Allen Bannister. The structure is legally insulated from any third-party claim. Based on the time-stamped public record of the divorce decree and the documented purchase and drawing dates of the winning ticket, no marital property claim exists under state law. Any lawsuit filed on this basis would have no legal standing and would be subject to immediate dismissal. Theo set the letter down. He sat with it for a moment, the weight of it, the finality. The money was real. It was his. No one could reach it. He should have felt something bigger. Relief, maybe. Excitement. Instead, he just felt still. He folded the letter carefully along its original crease and placed it in the manila folder he'd started keeping on the counter. Then he picked up his coffee, found it cold, and poured it down the sink. Ruth called that same evening. "I've been pulling records," she said, skipping any preamble, same as she always did when she was deep into something. City budget documents, public employee pension filings, council meeting minutes from about 8 months ago. Theo sat down on the couch. "What did you find?" "You remember the Hargrove budget proposal? The one that nearly gutted the infrastructure division last spring?" He remembered it. It had caused 2 weeks of internal meetings and a lot of anxious emails from people who didn't understand how budget cycles actually worked. In the end, the freeze never happened. The proposal was revised, the pension fund was untouched, and everything went back to normal. Most people in the division had forgotten about it within a month. There was a news report, Ruth said. Local paper, March 9th. The headline said City eyes pension freeze for infrastructure workers amid budget shortfall. It ran before the revised proposal came out. Before anyone corrected the story. She paused. Priscilla filed for divorce on April 21st. Theo was quiet. "That's 6 weeks, Theo. 6 weeks between that article and her filing." He heard papers shifting on her end. "I also pulled the court filing records. Her divorce petition was prepared and ready to file within 4 days of that article going online. 4 days, meaning she wasn't sitting on this decision for months. She read that story and started moving almost immediately." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "She thought your pension was getting frozen," he said. That's what the evidence shows. She never called the city, never looked at the revised proposal, which was published 2 weeks later and got exactly 0 news coverage because budget corrections never do. She just read one headline, made a decision, and lawyered up. Ruth's voice wasn't angry. It was flat and clear, the way it got when she was presenting facts in a professional setting and wanted every word to land cleanly. "I printed everything out," she said. "The original article, the correction that never got covered, the petition filing date, a timeline cross-referenced." Another pause. "I can come by tomorrow and walk you through it." "Yeah," Theo said. "Come by." She arrived the next morning with a manila folder thicker than his. She spread the documents across his kitchen table in order, left to right, the news article first, then the city's official revised budget proposal, then a printed screenshot of the court filing record with the date circled in red pen, then a simple one-page timeline she'd typed up herself, with every key date listed in chronological order. Theo looked at it all without touching anything. He read the headline from the original article slowly. "City Eyes, Pension Freeze for Infrastructure Workers Amid Budget Shortfall." Then he looked at the correction document. Clear language, published 2 weeks later. Pension fund fully protected. No freeze. Proposal revised. He looked at the filing date. Ruth watched him, but didn't speak. He traced the timeline with his eyes. Article, 4 days. Attorney retained, 6 weeks. Divorce petition filed. A full 1.5 years of proceedings before he signed the final decree last Friday. She hadn't left because she was unhappy. She hadn't left because something broke between them, or because she felt anything in particular. She'd read one story in a local paper, decided he was about to become a financial burden, and filed before she ever thought to ask him a single question. The pension had never been in danger. The job he'd held for 16 years, the one she'd spent most of those same years calling boring and small, and beneath what she'd imagined for herself, she'd fled from it based on a headline she never bothered to verify. He looked at the timeline one more time. Then he straightened up, exhaled slowly, and reached for the folder to add the documents to his growing stack. "Thank you," he said. Ruth nodded once. She sat down across from him and wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, and neither of them said anything for a while. Ruth had borrowed a folding cart from her building's storage room and driven across town on a Thursday afternoon to collect the last of Theo's things from the old house on Carver Street. He hadn't gone back himself. She hadn't asked him to explain that. She just said she'd handle it, and she did. Priscilla had left a cardboard box on the front porch, sealed with packing tape. No note. Ruth loaded it onto the cart, checked that nothing had been left behind in the garage, a pair of work boots, a level, a folded rain jacket on a hook near the side door, and started wheeling everything toward her car. That's when Odessa Marsh appeared. She came around the side of her house next door, wearing gardening gloves and carrying a small trowel, her silver-streaked hair tucked under a wide-brimmed hat. She was in her early 60s, round-faced and warm, the kind of woman who remembered your coffee order and asked about your mother. She'd lived next door to the Bannisters for 11 years. "Ruth." She pulled off one glove and pressed her hand to her chest. "Oh, I thought I recognized your car. How is Theo doing? I've been thinking about him." "He's managing," Ruth said. She kept her voice easy. "Day by day." Odessa shook her head slowly. "It's such a shame. He was always so steady. That house is going to feel different without him in it. I'll tell you that much." She glanced at the box on the cart. "Is that the last of his things?" "Just about." Odessa tugged off her second glove and folded both of them together in her hands. She looked toward Priscilla's front door for a moment, then back at Ruth. Her expression shifted into something softer, quieter. The look of someone who had opinions they hadn't been asked for. "Can I ask you something?" Ruth said. casually, the way she might ask about the weather. Of course. Did Priscilla seem— Ruth paused, like she was searching for the right word. Did she seem okay through all of this? She always put on a good face, but I wondered sometimes. Odessa let out a slow breath. She seemed fine, she said. Then, after a beat, with the faint tone of someone deciding a secret doesn't count if it's almost common knowledge. She had Desmond, so she wasn't exactly alone through any of it. Ruth kept her face still. Desmond? Her attorney? Odessa nodded. Well, yes, technically, but those two have been close for a long while now. She lowered her voice, though there was no one else around. Over a year. I probably shouldn't say more than that, but I don't think it's much of a secret. Not to anyone paying attention. I didn't realize it was like that, Ruth said. Odessa looked almost relieved to have it confirmed as obvious rather than scandalous. He's the one who pushed for the quick process, you know. What do you call it? The uncontested filing. No back and forth, no hearings, just sign and done. She waved a hand vaguely. Priscilla told me he said it was the cleanest way, fastest way to just move forward. A small pause. I think he wanted the whole thing wrapped up before people started asking questions about them. Ruth nodded slowly, like she was just absorbing neighborly gossip, not like every word was landing somewhere precise and important inside her mind. That makes sense, she said. Desmond seems like someone who likes to stay ahead of things. Exactly. Odessa seemed pleased to be understood. He had the whole thing mapped out. Priscilla just went along with it. She looked toward the house again. I hope she knows what she's doing. That's all I'll say. Ruth smiled. I'm sure she does. She thanked Odessa for the conversation. She said it was good to see her, that she'd pass along her regards to Theo. She loaded the last of the items into her trunk with steady hands and calm movements. She waited until she was in the driver's seat, with the door closed and the engine running before she pulled out her phone. Theo picked up on the second ring. I just talked to Odessa Marsh, Ruth said. She didn't soften it. She laid out everything, in the order it happened, the way she always did when the facts were serious enough to deserve it. Priscilla and Desmond. Over a year. Predating the divorce filing by a significant stretch. The uncontested fast-track process. Desmond's design, not Priscilla's instinct. Built to close the marriage quietly, quickly, before anyone thought to examine the relationship between a client and her attorney too closely. Theo didn't say anything. She could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. Theo. I heard you, he said. His voice was quiet. Not broken, just quiet. The way it got when he was processing something that required a moment before it could be spoken about. Ruth waited. The line stayed open. Neither of them hung up. Outside her window, Odessa was pulling weeds from the flower bed along her driveway, unhurried and entirely unaware of what she had just put into motion. The Municipal Water Authority's main office sat on the corner of Denning and Fifth, a squat brick building with a parking lot that smelled like wet asphalt when it rained. It was the kind of place where people wore safety vests over their dress shirts and kept printed checklists on clipboards, where the loudest sound on a normal Tuesday was the hum of the HVAC system and the occasional radio crackle from the field crews. Priscilla walked in just before 11 in the morning. She wore a cream blazer and heels that clicked against the tile floor like she was making a point with every step. Theo heard her before he saw her. He was standing at the large work table in the back bay, reviewing a pressure loss report with his colleague Marcus, when he heard that sound, precise and deliberate, and looked up. She stopped in the middle of the open floor. Theo. Her voice carried. The whole room heard it. 3 other engineers at their desks looked up. The receptionist at the front window stood a little straighter. Theo set down his pen. He walked toward her slowly. Calm, his face giving away exactly nothing. "This isn't the right place for this," he said, quietly enough that only she could hear. "Then give me 5 minutes privately," she said, "because your lawyer won't return our calls, and I'm not just going to disappear. There's nothing to discuss." "There is plenty to discuss." Her voice stayed controlled, but her jaw was tight. "You won $1 billion. We were married for 11 years. Whatever your attorney told you about the timeline, a judge might see it differently." She said it loudly enough that Marcus could hear it from 15 feet away. Theo didn't flinch. He didn't look around to check who was watching. He just kept his eyes on her, steady, the same way he'd looked at a cracked pipe in a failing system, with the full understanding that the problem in front of him was real, but manageable. "You need to leave," he said. "If you have a legal argument, it should come through proper channels. You know how to reach Gabriel Voss." Her eyes flickered. Just for a second. She left. Her heels clicked all the way back across the tile. The front door swung shut behind her. The office held its breath for a moment, then slowly returned to its normal hum. Marcus looked at Theo. He didn't ask. Theo picked his pen back up and pointed to the third line of the pressure loss report. "This reading here," he said. "That's your problem." 2 days later, Ruth forwarded him a link to a short piece posted by a local news blog, the kind of site that ran zoning disputes and city council recaps. The headline read, "Lottery winner's ex-wife claims she was left out in the cold." It was 6 paragraphs. It quoted a source close to the situation who suggested the winnings may have been structured in ways designed to exclude a valid spousal claim. It didn't name Desmond. It didn't need to. Theo read the article once. He closed the tab. He didn't call the reporter. He didn't post anything. He didn't text anyone from his old social circle to correct the record. Ruth asked him twice if he wanted her to respond on his behalf, and both times he said no. Gabriel, when Theo called him that evening, said the article had no legal weight. "It's noise," Gabriel said. "They know the claim is dead. This is what you do when you've got nothing. You make it loud and hope the other person panics." "I know," Theo said. There was a pause. "You have something in mind," Gabriel said. It wasn't a question. "I want to call Desmond." Gabriel was quiet for a moment. "And say what exactly?" "That I'm willing to sit down. That I've been thinking about it, and maybe there's a goodwill arrangement worth discussing." Theo kept his voice even. "Let him think I'm rattled. Let him think the article worked." Another pause, shorter this time. "You want him in a room." "I want them both in a room," Theo said. He could hear Gabriel thinking it through on the other end of the line. The slow exhale that meant he was running it against every angle. "All right," Gabriel said finally. "Make the call. But don't offer numbers. Don't offer anything specific. Just open the door." Theo dialed Desmond's number the next morning from his kitchen table. Desmond picked up on the third ring. His voice was smooth, warm, the practiced warmth of someone who had trained himself to sound like he was doing you a favor. "Theo, I'm glad you reached out." "I've been thinking," Theo said. "Maybe we should sit down, in person. Just talk through whether there's something reasonable I can do here." He let a small pause sit there. "I don't want this to get uglier than it has to." Desmond didn't hesitate. "I think that's very mature of you," he said. "Very mature. I know Priscilla would appreciate the gesture." They settled on a date. The following Wednesday, a conference room at Desmond's office. Theo hung up the phone. He sat at the table for a moment, the morning light flat and gray through the kitchen window. Then he opened his laptop, pulled up a blank document, and began making a list of everything he would need. Ruth called on a Sunday evening, 4 days before the meeting. Theo was eating at his kitchen table. Rice, grilled chicken, nothing fancy. He'd gotten used to cooking for one. He answered on the second ring. "You need to see this tonight," Ruth said. No greeting, no preamble. That was how he knew it was serious. She was at his door 40 minutes later with a manila folder tucked under one arm and her laptop bag over her shoulder. She didn't take off her coat. She just sat down at his table, opened the folder, and spread 3 printed documents in front of him like she was laying out evidence at a trial. Because she was. "He filed this 11 days ago," she said, tapping the first page. "It's a financial interest disclosure attached to a private legal services agreement. Desmond listed himself as a secondary beneficiary on any out-of-court settlement Priscilla might receive, up to 40%. Theo looked at the page. The document was dense, the kind of thing designed to look routine to anyone who didn't know how to read it. Ruth had highlighted the critical line in yellow. Secondary beneficiary designation, D. Okafor, Eskendru. 40% of net settlement proceeds. He filed this while he's still acting as her attorney, Ruth said. "That's a conflict of interest," Theo said. "It's worse than that." Ruth pulled the second page forward. He structured it as a legal fee arrangement, which means if she ever questioned it, he'd say she agreed to a contingency. But the language here gives him the right to receive payment directly, separate from her. She wouldn't even have to sign off on the transfer. Theo sat back in his chair. He thought about Priscilla standing on his doorstep in her coat, eyes bright with certainty. Desmond right behind her, with his smooth lawyer's posture and his easy confidence. He thought about how Desmond had sounded on the phone. Very mature of you, like he was already counting money that was never going to exist. Priscilla thought she was the one running the play. She didn't know she was also the mark. "Does she know about this document?" Theo asked. "I don't think so," Ruth said. "The filing is buried in a stack of routine disclosures. She'd have no reason to look for it unless she knew where to look." She paused. "Which she doesn't, because she trusts him." The room was quiet for a moment. Ruth closed the folder. "Theo, you have everything now." She said it plainly, not triumphantly. Just as a statement of fact, the way she always delivered things. No decoration, just the truth sitting there on the table. She was right. He did. He had Gabriel's signed letter confirming the irrevocable trust, the winnings locked away under his name alone, untouchable by any court claim Priscilla could file. He had the city budget records Ruth had pulled weeks ago, the ones that showed the pension freeze rumor was wrong, that Priscilla had made a panicked, unverified decision and blew up 11 years of marriage on a number she never bothered to check. He had Odessa's account of the affair, confirmed in enough detail to be credible. And now he had this, Desmond's quiet little document, filed 11 days ago, attaching himself to a payout that was never coming. After Ruth left, Theo went to his desk drawer and took out his phone. He pulled up the audio file he'd recorded the morning Priscilla and Desmond had shown up at his door. The recording app had been running before he even opened it. He'd made that decision in the few seconds between hearing the knock and turning the handle. A quiet, deliberate choice, the kind that felt small in the moment and only made sense later. He put his earbuds in and listened. Desmond's voice came first, smooth and professional, talking about the ticket purchase date as though he hadn't already confirmed with a second attorney that the claim was worthless. Then Priscilla. Her voice was different from her public voice, less measured, sharper at the edges. She'd said it while Theo was still holding the door half open. She'd said it with the particular confidence of someone who believed they were speaking only to an ally. He's not going to fight us on this. I know him. He never fights anything. And then, quieter, almost an afterthought. He never fights back. Theo took the earbuds out. He sat with that for a moment. Not with anger. Something more like clarity. The feeling you get when you finally understand why a system failed, when the data lines up and the cause becomes obvious and plain. He opened his desk drawer and retrieved the folder he'd been building for the past 2 weeks. He placed Gabriel's trust letter on top. Behind it, the pension records. Behind those, the notes from Ruth's conversation with Odessa, written in Ruth's precise, tight handwriting. And behind those, Desmond's financial interest disclosure, highlighted in yellow. Last, he placed a printed copy of the audio file's timestamp and a small USB drive containing the recording itself. He closed the folder. He set it on the edge of his desk, squared it against the corner, and went to bed. The conference room was on the 14th floor of a downtown office building, booked through Gabriel's firm. Neutral ground. That had been Gabriel's suggestion, and Theo had agreed without argument. The room had a long table, 6 leather chairs, and a window that looked out over the city. The morning light came in, flat and gray. Theo arrived 12 minutes early. He set his folder on the table, poured himself a glass of water from the pitcher near the window, and sat down. He didn't check his phone. He just waited. They arrived together. Of course they did. Desmond pushed through the door first, one hand adjusting his tie, the other holding a slim leather portfolio. His suit was dark charcoal, sharp at the shoulders, the kind of suit that was supposed to tell you something about the man wearing it. He scanned the room the way lawyers do, quick, assessing, looking for the advantage before anyone said a word. Priscilla came in behind him. She was dressed well, hair done, chin up. She looked like a woman who had already decided how this meeting was going to go. She glanced at Theo's folder on the table but didn't react to it. Theo. She said his name like it was a small thing, like a comma. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Sit down, Theo said, quiet, polite. They sat across from him. Desmond set his portfolio on the table and folded his hands on top of it. He offered a practiced smile, the kind that was meant to read as professional, but landed closer to satisfied. We appreciate you being reasonable about this, Desmond said. I think with the right structure, we can reach something that works for everyone. Theo didn't respond to that. He opened his folder. He placed the first document on the table and slid it across. Gabriel's signed letter, 2 pages, the trust confirmation printed on official letterhead with a case number and a notary stamp at the bottom. That's the irrevocable trust, Theo said. The winnings were transferred into it 6 days ago. My name only. Established under state law governing separate property, acquired after final dissolution of marriage. He tapped the date on the top line. This isn't a negotiating position. It's a legal fact. No court in this state can touch it. Desmond picked up the letter. His eyes moved across the page. The smile didn't disappear, but it slowed down, like something behind it had shifted. Priscilla looked at Desmond. Theo reached into the folder again. He placed his phone on the table and pressed play. Desmond's own voice filled the room first, smooth and certain, making his argument about the ticket purchase date on Theo's doorstep. Theo watched Desmond go very still. Then Priscilla's voice came through the small speaker. He's not going to fight us on this. I know him. He never fights anything. A pause, and then, he never fights back. Theo stopped the recording. The room was quiet. Priscilla's jaw had tightened. She was staring at the phone on the table like it had bitten her. That was recorded on your doorstep, Theo said. The timestamp is on the file. It's been copied to 3 separate devices. He said it without any heat, just information, delivered clearly. He pulled the next documents from the folder and laid them out in a row. 6 weeks before you filed, he said, looking at Priscilla, there was a rumor that my municipal pension was being frozen. City budget trouble. You heard about it, and you believed it. He placed the public budget records on the table. Ruth's printouts, dated, sourced. The freeze never happened. It was a proposal that was rejected at the department level before it ever went to a vote. My pension was never at risk. He paused. You never asked me. You just filed. Priscilla didn't speak. Her hands were in her lap and very still. Theo turned to the next page. The affair started 14 months before the filing, he said. He didn't look at Desmond when he said it. He kept his eyes on Priscilla. Odessa confirmed the timeline. The rush to finalize the divorce quickly and quietly. No asset review, no discovery, nothing. That was Desmond's idea. So the two of you could move forward without anyone asking questions. Now he looked at Desmond. He slid the last document across the table. He filed this 11 days ago, Theo said. It's a financial interest disclosure attached to a private legal services agreement. He listed himself as a 40% secondary beneficiary on any settlement you might receive from me. He let that sit for a second. Paid directly to him. You wouldn't even have had to countersign the transfer. Priscilla looked down at the document. Then she looked at Desmond. Something moved across Desmond's face. Not embarrassment. Worse than that. It was the specific expression of a man running a calculation in real time and not liking what the numbers said. He'd built the whole thing, the affair, the rushed divorce, the doorstep visit, the media pressure, around a payout that was locked in an irrevocable trust 6 days ago and had never been legally available to begin with. Priscilla had never told him. Either she hadn't known or she hadn't said. Either way, it had cost him everything. There is no settlement, Theo said. His voice was even, unhurried. There was never going to be one. This meeting was so you'd understand exactly why. He closed the folder. He stood up. He picked it up from the table, tucked it under his arm, and walked to the door. He didn't look back. He pulled the door open, stepped out into the hallway, and let it fall shut behind him. The conference room on the 14th floor was rented until noon. Theo was gone by 9:47. Priscilla and Desmond sat across from each other for a long time after that. The documents still spread across the table between them, and neither one said anything worth saying. By Thursday, the story had moved inside Desmond's own firm. It didn't take long. It never does when lawyers start talking to other lawyers. One of Gabriel's associates had flagged the financial disclosure filing, the one that named Desmond as a 40% beneficiary on any settlement from a client he was actively representing, and passed it quietly to the right person. From there, it moved fast. By Friday morning, 3 senior partners at Okafor and Shields had read the document. By Friday afternoon, they'd called an emergency internal review. By Friday evening, they'd drafted a formal bar complaint and submitted it to the State Disciplinary Board. The complaint was specific. Desmond had represented Priscilla Bannister in a divorce proceeding while engaged in a private romantic relationship with her. He had advised her to pursue a lawsuit. He had reasonable grounds to know was meritless. The time-stamped trust, the public record of the divorce filing date, the drawing date, all of it was right there in the public lottery disclosure. And he had filed paperwork designed to redirect any settlement payout to himself, without his client's clear knowledge or written consent. Conflict of interest, breach of fiduciary duty, conduct unbecoming. 3 separate violations. 1 complaint, signed by 2 partners. Desmond was suspended pending investigation the following Monday. His keycard stopped working at 8 in the morning. His assistant had already been reassigned. A suspended attorney with nothing left to protect is a dangerous thing. Desmond called a reporter at the regional desk of the local paper on Tuesday. Not the same one he'd contacted to pressure Theo. A different one. Someone he'd fed stories to before. Someone who owed him a favor. He gave the reporter everything. The affair, the timeline, Priscilla's belief about the pension freeze, the doorstep visit, the failed meeting. All of it, laid out in a way that made Priscilla sound reckless and him sound like a man who had simply been caught up in something bigger than he'd understood. It was a lie, of course. Every version of the story that made Desmond look like a bystander was a lie. But it printed. The headline wasn't cruel. It didn't need to be. Real estate broker at center of lottery divorce dispute was enough. The details in the story did the rest. The affair, the botched lawsuit, the rushed divorce built on a pension rumor that turned out to be false. A prominent local broker who had pushed out of her marriage over a financial miscalculation and walked away with nothing to show for it. Riyad and Holt Realty read the article that same morning. They called Priscilla at noon. The conversation was short. The brokerage had a reputation it had spent 20 years building. Residential real estate ran on trust, on referrals, on the kind of name recognition that meant something to buyers and sellers sitting across from each other at a closing table. Priscilla's name now meant something else. Her broker's license wasn't being revoked. That wasn't theirs to do. But her contract with the firm was. Effective immediately. Mutual separation, they called it. The kind of language that was supposed to soften something that couldn't be softened. She didn't argue. There wasn't any point. Her office at Reed and Holt was on the second floor of a converted brownstone on Caldwell Street. She'd worked out of it for 6 years. Her name was still on the door in small gold letters when she arrived the next morning with an empty box. The office wasn't big. A desk, a filing cabinet, a bookshelf with staging catalogs, and her real estate license framed on the wall. A small cactus on the windowsill that she'd kept alive for 3 years through sheer stubbornness. A framed photo of herself at a ribbon cutting for a commercial property she'd listed, smiling wide, shaking hands with someone important. She took the photo down first. Her assistant, a young woman named Becca, who had worked with her for 2 years, knocked on the open door and then stood in the frame of it. She held a stack of client files that needed to be reassigned. "Where do you want these?" Becca asked. Her voice was careful, flat in the way that voices go flat when someone is trying not to show you what they're really thinking. "Just leave them on the desk," Priscilla said. Becca set the files down and left without another word. She didn't offer to help with the box. She didn't ask if Priscilla needed anything. She just walked back down the hall, her footsteps quiet and quick, the way someone walks when they want to be somewhere else. Priscilla stood in the middle of the room and looked at the cactus on the windowsill. She left it there. She picked up the box. She looked around the office once, the empty desk, the bare wall where the framed license had hung, the door with her name still on it, in small gold letters that would be peeled off by someone else before the week was out. She walked out. The sign was simple. Dark green letters on a cream-colored background, mounted above the entrance to the building. Clean lines. Nothing flashy. Just the name, and the years underneath it, and a small bronze plaque to the left of the double doors that said, "Funded, in part, by a gift from the Bannister Family Trust." Theo stood on the sidewalk in front of it and read it the same way he'd read it the last 4 times he'd been here. Slowly, from left to right. Like it might change if he wasn't paying attention. It didn't change. The Harold Bannister Community Center, 1951-2019. His father had been a quiet man, a bus driver for 31 years who fixed things around the neighborhood on weekends and never once asked to be thanked for it. The kind of man who showed up, who did what he said he'd do, who believed that the work itself was the point, not the recognition. Theo thought his father would have liked this building, not because his name was on it, because of what it was for. Inside, there were 2 classrooms for adult education, a room for after-school tutoring, and a meeting hall that local organizations had already booked out through the end of next year. There was a youth engineering workshop on the 2nd floor, donated tools, a long work table, a whiteboard covered in diagrams, where 14 kids between the ages of 12 and 17 came twice a week to learn how systems worked. Theo had stood in that room on the first day and watched a 12-year-old girl trace a water flow diagram with her finger, completely absorbed, and he had not trusted himself to speak for almost a full minute. He stood on the sidewalk now and looked at the sign a moment longer. Then he put his hands in his pockets and walked. Ruth's office was on Mercer Street, 2 blocks from the courthouse. The firm's name was painted on the frosted glass panel of the front door in simple block letters: Bannister Legal Research and Paralegal Services. It had been open for 8 months. She had 3 full-time staff and a roster of attorney clients who paid her firm to do the investigative groundwork they didn't have time to do themselves. She was good at it. She always had been. She just hadn't had the space to prove it on her own terms until now. Theo had walked her through the funding conversation once. She'd interrupted him twice to tell him it was too much. He'd waited both times for her to finish, and then continued explaining the structure exactly as Gabriel had set it up. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment. "You're not going to let me say no, are you?" she said. It wasn't really a question. "I'm not," he said. She'd laughed. The real kind. The kind that comes up fast and surprises even the person laughing. And then she'd told him to get out of her kitchen so she could think, and he'd stood up and hugged her instead, and she'd let him. Her name was Camille. She was a civil engineer for the County Parks Department, and Theo had met her at a water systems conference 9 months ago, standing in front of a drainage presentation with her arms crossed and a look on her face that said she had real questions and was not particularly interested in polite ones. He liked her immediately. She didn't think his job was boring. She thought it was important, which was different, and she said so the first time they talked about it over coffee after the conference ended. She didn't mock the Friday ticket. She thought it was a funny habit for a man who didn't actually need the money. And she told him so, and they both laughed. And that was that. She wasn't loud about the way she felt about him. She was steady. She showed up when she said she would, and she said what she meant, and she didn't need him to be anything other than what he already was. That was, he had come to understand, rarer than it sounded. They didn't see Priscilla often, but Theo had heard things, the way you hear things in a city that isn't quite small, but knows how to pass a story along. She'd moved out of the house on Fairview after the brokerage let her go. A smaller place now. An apartment in a part of the city she wouldn't have considered 2 years ago. Odessa, according to Ruth, had quietly pulled back. Not dramatically, not with a speech, just the slow way people pull back when they realize a friendship only moved in one direction. Priscilla's old social circle had done the same. The dinner parties, the referral networks, the women she'd lunched with at places with cloth napkins and a wine list. Those were gone, too. Not because the world had punished her, just because she'd spent years building a life around an image, and the image was gone, and there wasn't much underneath it. Theo didn't feel good about that. He didn't feel bad about it either. He just knew it, the way you know a fact, and left it where it was. He stopped at the corner store on Elm Street at 6:15 that Friday, same as always. Mr. Papadakis was behind the counter. He was always behind the counter. He had a small television mounted in the upper corner of the wall, sound off, cycling through the local news. Theo set a bottle of water on the counter and reached into the small plastic rack beside the register. 1 ticket, same as every Friday. "Still at it," Mr. Papadakis said, smiling as he rang it up. "Habit," Theo said. He tucked the ticket into his coat pocket without looking at it. He picked up his water. He pushed through the door and stepped out into the evening air. The streetlights had just come on. The sidewalk was quiet. Somewhere down the block, someone was cooking something that smelled like garlic and warmth. The sky above the buildings was going that particular shade of dark blue that happens right before full night, the last of the daylight still holding on at the edges. Theo walked home. The ticket sat in his pocket. He didn't think about it. He thought about the sign above the community center doors, and the girl with her finger tracing the diagram, and Camille, who would probably already be at his apartment with takeout and a strong opinion about whatever documentary she'd picked for the evening. He smiled. He kept walking. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.